The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the Afghan mountainside as Sergeant Maria Gonzalez checked her equipment one final time. At 28 years old, she had already completed 3 tours of duty, but something felt different about this mission. The intel was sketchy, the terrain was hostile, and her usual team had been split up for various assignments across the region. Maria stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her presence commanded respect from every soldier around her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held the kind of intensity that came from years of making life-or-death decisions. She had grown up in a small Texas town where her father worked construction and her mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. The military had given her purpose, discipline, and a family she never knew she needed. The mission briefing had been straightforward on paper. Intelligence suggested that a high-value target was hiding in a remote village nestled deep in the mountains. The plan was simple: insert a team of 24 soldiers, conduct a search operation, and extract within 6 hours. Maria would serve as the team's medic and communications specialist, roles she had mastered through countless operations. But as their convoy of armored vehicles wound through the narrow mountain passes, Maria noticed things that made her stomach tighten with unease. The local population seemed unusually absent from the roads. No children playing, no vendors selling goods, no farmers tending their fields. It was as if the entire region had been evacuated overnight. Lieutenant Colonel James Richardson, the mission commander, was a career officer who believed in following orders without question. He had made it clear from the beginning that he considered Maria's presence on the team a necessary burden rather than an asset. Women in combat roles were still controversial, and Richardson belonged to the old school that believed warfare was a man's domain. "Gonzalez!" Richardson barked over the radio as their convoy slowed near the target village. "You'll stay with the vehicles and maintain communications. This is a combat operation, not a medical clinic." Maria bit back her response. She had saved more lives in the past 3 years than most soldiers would save in their entire careers. Her medical training was extensive, and her combat experience was proven, but arguing with Richardson would only make things worse for everyone involved. The village appeared deserted as the team moved in. Ancient mud brick houses lined narrow streets that had seen centuries of conflict. Prayer flags fluttered in the mountain wind, and the smell of cooking fires still lingered in the air, suggesting the residents had left recently and in a hurry. Maria watched from her position near the vehicles as the 23 other soldiers spread out through the village in carefully coordinated teams. She monitored their radio communications, tracked their movements on her tactical display, and kept her medical kit ready for immediate deployment if needed. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to plan. The teams methodically searched each building, interviewed the few remaining elderly residents, and secured potential evidence. Maria began to relax slightly, thinking that perhaps her earlier concerns had been unfounded. Then everything changed in an instant. The first explosion came from the eastern edge of the village, a massive blast that shook the ground beneath Maria's feet and sent a pillar of smoke and debris into the clear mountain sky. Before she could process what was happening, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The carefully planned operation had walked straight into a trap. "All units, this is Alpha Base," Maria called into her radio, using the predetermined emergency protocols. "We have contact from multiple positions. Repeat, we are taking fire from multiple positions." The radio crackled with overlapping voices as soldiers called for support, reported casualties, and tried to coordinate a response to the ambush. Maria could hear the panic in their voices, the kind of fear that came when a routine operation turned into a fight for survival. "Gonzalez, we need immediate extraction." Richardson's voice cut through the chaos. "Get those vehicles ready to move. We're pulling back to the rally point." But as Maria looked around, she realized that the trap had been even more carefully planned than anyone had imagined. The road they had used to enter the village was now blocked by massive boulders that had been triggered to fall from the mountainside above. Their escape route was completely cut off. "Sir, the road is blocked," Maria reported. "I repeat, our extraction route is compromised. We need an alternative plan." The silence that followed her report lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When Richardson's voice came back over the radio, it carried a tone that Maria had never heard from him before. Pure, undisguised fear. "Understood. All teams fall back to defensive positions. We'll hold until air support arrives." But Maria knew what Richardson was trying not to say. Air support was hours away, and they were trapped in hostile territory with limited ammunition and supplies. The carefully orchestrated ambush suggested that their enemy had been planning this trap for weeks, possibly months. As the firefight intensified around the village, Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She grabbed her medical kit and her rifle, checked her ammunition supply, and prepared to disobey direct orders. Her fellow soldiers were trapped out there, and she was the only one in position to help them. The radio chatter grew more desperate by the minute. Sergeant Williams reported that his team was pinned down in a compound on the northern edge of the village. Corporal Davis called for medical assistance after taking shrapnel from an improvised explosive device. Private First Class Johnson screamed for backup as his position came under heavy assault from rocket-propelled grenades. Maria had trained for moments like this her entire career, but training could never fully prepare someone for the reality of combat. The sounds of bullets whistling overhead, the smell of gunpowder and dust, the knowledge that death could come from any direction at any moment. These were experiences that changed a person forever. She thought about her family back in Texas, about the promise she had made to her mother to come home safely, about the career she had built in the military and everything she stood to lose by disobeying orders. But as she listened to her fellow soldiers calling for help, none of those concerns seemed to matter. "This is Gonzalez," she announced over the radio. "I'm moving to provide medical support to forward teams. Maintain communications on all channels." "Negative, Gonzalez." Richardson's response was immediate and sharp. "You are ordered to maintain your current position. Do not advance into the combat zone." Maria looked at the radio in her hand for a long moment, then switched it to emergency frequency and clipped it to her vest. She had made her choice. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules, and sometimes following orders meant abandoning the people who depended on you. The first building she needed to reach was about 200 yards away, across open ground that was now swept by enemy fire. Maria had completed urban combat training, desert warfare courses, and mountain operations schools. But nothing had prepared her for the isolation of making this journey alone. She took a deep breath, checked her equipment one final time, and stepped out from behind the relative safety of the armored vehicles. The moment she moved into the open, bullets began hitting the ground around her feet, and she knew there was no turning back. The young woman from Texas had just begun the most important mission of her life, even though she had no idea that the next 6 hours would test everything she had ever learned about courage, determination, and what it truly meant to leave no one behind. As Maria sprinted toward the first building where Sergeant Williams's team was trapped, she could hear Richardson screaming orders over the radio for her to return to her position immediately. But she had already switched her radio to a different channel, focusing instead on the voices of soldiers who needed her help. The mountain wind carried the sounds of battle across the ancient village, and somewhere in the chaos, a small-town girl was about to prove that heroes aren't born. They're made in moments when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. The sprint across the open courtyard felt like the longest 200 yards of Maria's life. Bullets whined past her ears and kicked up puffs of dust at her feet as she zigzagged between abandoned market stalls and overturned carts. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and her breathing came in short, controlled bursts as she focused on reaching the building where Williams and his team were trapped. When she finally dove through the doorway of the ancient mud-brick structure, she found chaos waiting inside. Sergeant Williams lay propped against a wall, his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle and blood seeping through his combat uniform. Two other soldiers, Martinez and O'Brien, were positioned at windows returning fire while trying to shield their wounded sergeant from further injury. "Gonzalez!" Williams gasped when he saw her. "Thank God! I thought we were going to die in this hellhole." Maria immediately went to work, her medical training taking over despite the bullets still flying through the windows above their heads. Williams had taken a piece of shrapnel that had shattered his femur and severed an artery in his thigh. Without immediate treatment, he would bleed out within minutes. "Martinez, I need you to apply pressure here," Maria instructed, guiding the young private's hands to the correct position on Williams' leg. "Don't let up, no matter what happens outside. O'Brien, how much ammunition do you have left?" "Maybe 2 magazines," O'Brien replied without taking his eyes off the street outside. "These guys know exactly where we are. Every time we try to move, they're ready for us." Maria worked quickly, using a tourniquet to stop the bleeding and stabilizing Williams's leg with splints made from broken furniture. The sergeant was losing consciousness from blood loss and shock, but his breathing was stable. He would live if they could get him to proper medical care within the next few hours. "Listen to me," Maria told the two privates as she prepared to move Williams. "We can't stay here. They're going to overrun this position soon, and then we're all dead. I've got a plan, but you have to trust me completely." Martinez looked at her with wide eyes. He was barely 19 years old, fresh out of basic training, and this was his first combat deployment. "What do we do, Sergeant?" "We're going to move to the building across the street where Johnson's team is pinned down. Then we'll work our way through the village, picking up everyone we can along the way. The enemy expects us to hunker down and wait for rescue, so we're going to do the opposite." O'Brien shook his head. "That's suicide, Gonzalez." The lieutenant colonel ordered everyone to hold defensive positions. "If we start moving around, we'll just make ourselves easier targets." "The lieutenant colonel's plan isn't working," Maria replied firmly. "Half our people are already wounded, we're running out of ammunition, and air support is still hours away. If we stay put, we die. If we move, we might have a chance." She helped Williams to his feet, supporting most of his weight, while Martinez grabbed the sergeant's rifle and remaining gear. "O'Brien, you take point. Martinez, you help me with Williams. We move fast, we move quiet, and we don't stop until we reach the next building." The journey across the narrow street was terrifying. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in buildings throughout the village, creating intersecting fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. But Maria had studied the tactical situation carefully, and she had identified a brief window when the enemy shooters would have to reload simultaneously. "Now!" she whispered, and the 4 soldiers burst from the building. They made it halfway across the street before the shooting started again. O'Brien took a bullet through his shoulder but kept running, his teeth gritted against the pain. Martinez stumbled under Williams' weight but managed to stay upright. Maria felt a bullet tug at her sleeve but ignored it completely, focused only on reaching the relative safety of the next building. Inside the second structure, they found Private Johnson and 2 other soldiers in even worse condition than Williams's team had been. Johnson had burns on his arms and face from an explosion that had brought down part of the roof. The other 2 soldiers, Thompson and Rodriguez, were both wounded but still able to fight. "Jesus, Gonzalez, how did you get here?" Johnson gasped. "We've been trapped for over an hour. These guys have us surrounded." "Not anymore," Maria replied, already moving to treat Johnson's burns. "We're getting out of here, all of us, but I need everyone who can walk to help carry the wounded." As she worked on Johnson's injuries, Maria could hear Richardson's voice crackling over the radio, demanding updates from teams throughout the village. Several units weren't responding at all, which meant they were either dead, unconscious, or had lost their communications equipment. "Thompson, Rodriguez, how many other teams do you know about?" Maria asked while wrapping Johnson's burns with sterile bandages from her medical kit. "Last we heard, there were at least 3 more groups still active," Thompson replied. Sergeant Davis has 4 guys trapped in the old mosque on the west side. Corporal Kim's team is holed up in what looks like a school building to the south. And there's another group somewhere near the market, but we lost radio contact with them about 20 minutes ago. Maria did quick calculations in her head. If those reports were accurate, there were at least 15 more soldiers scattered throughout the village, all in desperate need of help. Her own group now numbered 7 people, 3 of whom were seriously wounded and couldn't fight effectively. The tactical situation was getting worse by the minute. The enemy had clearly planned this ambush carefully, positioning fighters to cut off escape routes and prevent the scattered American teams from linking up with each other. Standard military doctrine called for the teams to establish defensive positions and wait for reinforcement or air support, but Maria could see that strategy would only result in more casualties. She made another decision that went against everything she had been taught in her military training. Instead of trying to establish radio contact with her commanding officer, she switched to a frequency that would reach all the American teams simultaneously. "This is Sergeant Gonzalez broadcasting on emergency frequency," she announced. "All units listen carefully. We cannot hold our current positions indefinitely. I am organizing a tactical withdrawal that will consolidate all teams and move toward the original rally point. Any unit that can move should prepare to relocate on my signal." The radio exploded with responses, most of them negative. Richardson's voice cut through the chatter, furious and threatening. "Gonzalez, you are explicitly ordered to cease all unauthorized communications and return to your assigned position immediately. You are endangering the entire mission with your reckless actions." But other voices joined the conversation, soldiers who were trapped and running out of options. Sergeant Davis reported that his position was being overrun. Corporal Kim said his team had only enough ammunition for another 10 minutes of fighting. The mysterious group near the market finally came back online, revealing that they had 2 soldiers down and were surrounded. Maria looked around at the 6 soldiers with her in the partially collapsed building. Williams was unconscious but stable. Johnson was alert, but couldn't use his arms effectively due to his burns. The others were scared, wounded, and looking to her for leadership, despite the fact that she had no official authority to command them. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced, both to the soldiers in the room and to anyone listening on the radio frequency. "We're going to move as one unit through the village, picking up every American soldier we can find along the way. We'll use covering fire and movement tactics, but our primary objective is getting everyone out alive." "That's crazy," Rodriguez protested. "We'll be sitting ducks moving through those streets." "We're sitting ducks right here," Maria replied. "The difference is, if we move, we can help each other. If we stay separated, we die separately." She spent the next few minutes explaining her plan in detail. It was dangerous, probably illegal in terms of military protocol, and had a very low probability of success according to any conventional analysis. But it was also the only plan that offered hope for getting all the American soldiers out of the village alive. As Maria prepared her small group for movement, she thought about the promise she had made to herself when she first joined the military. She would never leave a fellow soldier behind, no matter what the personal cost. Today, that promise was being tested in ways she had never imagined. The sounds of battle continued to echo through the mountain village as darkness began to fall. Somewhere in the maze of ancient buildings, 23 American soldiers waited for rescue that might never come. But Maria Gonzalez had decided that she would not let them wait alone. The next 3 hours became a blur of calculated risks, desperate courage, and split-second decisions that would haunt Maria for the rest of her life. Moving through the narrow streets of the ancient village with wounded soldiers while under constant enemy fire required skills that no military training could fully prepare someone for. It demanded something deeper, an unshakable determination to protect the people who had become her family through shared hardship and danger. The first rescue attempt took them to Sergeant Davis and his team, who were trapped in the old mosque on the western edge of the village. Maria's group had grown to 7 people, but 3 were seriously wounded and could barely walk without assistance. Moving quietly through the rubble-strewn streets while carrying injured soldiers seemed almost impossible. But Maria had learned to break impossible problems into smaller, manageable pieces. "O'Brien, you and Thompson take the north approach," she whispered, as they crouched behind an overturned vehicle about 50 yards from the mosque. "Martinez and Rodriguez, you're with me on the direct assault. Johnson, you stay here with Williams and provide covering fire if things go bad." Johnson nodded grimly, his burned hands wrapped in Maria's makeshift bandages, but still capable of operating his rifle. "What if you don't come back?" "Then you get Williams to the rally point and call for extraction," Maria replied without hesitation. "But we're all coming back. That's not negotiable." The assault on the mosque required perfect timing and coordination. The enemy fighters had positioned themselves to watch all the obvious approaches, but Maria had noticed a weakness in their coverage, a blind spot created by the building's ancient architecture and the way shadows fell in the late afternoon light. When the shooting started, it was brief and intense. Maria's team moved with the kind of synchronization that comes from shared desperation and absolute trust in each other. They reached Davis and his 4 soldiers, just as the enemy was preparing to overrun their position with a final coordinated attack. "Gonzalez!" Davis called out when he saw her. "How in hell did you get here?" "Long story," Maria replied, immediately moving to assess the condition of Davis's team. 2 were wounded but mobile. 1 had taken a bullet through his shoulder, and the 4th was unconscious from blood loss. "Can you travel?" "Do we have a choice?" "Not if you want to live." The combined group now numbered 12 soldiers with 6 wounded to varying degrees. Moving them through the village streets would require more than tactical skill. It would require the kind of battlefield leadership that separates good soldiers from legendary ones. Maria made another decision that violated every rule of military engagement. She decided to go on the offensive against the enemy positions, using aggressive tactics to create confusion and cover for her evacuation efforts. "Listen to me," she told the 11 soldiers who could still fight effectively. "We're not running away from these guys anymore. We're going to attack them, disrupt their positions, and use the chaos to move our wounded to safety." Corporal Kim's voice came over the radio, desperate and fading. "This is Kim. We're almost out of ammunition. They're preparing for another assault. I don't think we can hold much longer." "Kim, this is Gonzalez. We're coming for you. Hold for another 15 minutes. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours, Kim replied. "We've got wounded. We're running out of options and—" His transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of gunfire and explosions. Maria looked at her small army of wounded and exhausted soldiers, knowing that Kim's team represented at least 5 more people who would die if she couldn't reach them in time. The attack on the enemy positions was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. Working with soldiers from 3 different units who had never trained together, she orchestrated a series of coordinated assaults that created just enough confusion to allow movement through the village streets. Thompson and Rodriguez attacked enemy positions from the east, while Davis and O'Brien created diversions to the north. Maria led the wounded soldiers through the chaos, moving from building to building while the sound of gunfire echoed off ancient walls that had witnessed centuries of conflict. They reached Kim's position just as his team was preparing to make their final stand. 5 soldiers trapped in what had once been a village school, surrounded by enemy fighters and down to their last magazines of ammunition. The building's walls were pocked with bullet holes, and smoke from burning debris filled the air. "Kim!" Maria called as her team burst through the school's front entrance. "We're here to get you out!" The rescue turned into the fiercest firefight of the entire operation. Enemy forces, realizing that their carefully planned ambush was falling apart, concentrated their remaining fighters on preventing the American soldiers from linking up. For nearly an hour, the old school building became the center of a battle that would determine whether anyone made it home alive. Maria found herself making medical decisions under fire, treating wounded soldiers while bullets shattered windows above her head. Kim had taken shrapnel in his chest and was having difficulty breathing. 2 of his soldiers were unconscious from blood loss. The others were in shock but still able to fight. "How many more?" Davis asked during a brief lull in the fighting. Maria checked her tactical notes. "One more group. The team that went silent near the market. Could be 3 to 5 soldiers." "And if they're already dead?" "Then we've done everything we could." But the team near the market wasn't dead. When Maria's enlarged group finally fought their way to the old marketplace in the center of the village, they found 4 soldiers who had been defending their position for over 4 hours against overwhelming odds. Sergeant Foster and his 3 men had turned a collapsed vendor stall into a fortress, using their limited ammunition and improvised explosives to hold off repeated enemy attacks. "Foster!" Maria called out. "We're here to extract you!" "About damn time," Foster replied, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders and breathing smoke. "We've been having a hell of a party here, but we're ready to go home now." The final phase of the evacuation required everything Maria had learned about leadership, tactics, and battlefield medicine. With 23 soldiers now under her protection, many wounded, all exhausted, and running critically low on ammunition, she had to organize a fighting withdrawal across several miles of hostile mountain terrain to reach the original rally point. Richardson's voice continued to crackle over the radio, alternately threatening court-martial proceedings and demanding immediate reports on the tactical situation. But Maria had stopped listening to his orders hours ago. Her responsibility now was to the soldiers who had trusted her enough to follow her into this desperate gamble. The withdrawal took another 2 hours and covered some of the most difficult terrain any of them had ever crossed. Carrying wounded soldiers across rocky slopes while under sporadic enemy fire required a level of physical and mental endurance that pushed everyone to their absolute limits. But as the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, Maria finally led her small army of survivors to the rally point where helicopter extraction was waiting. The pilot, a veteran of dozens of combat missions, later said that he had never seen a more determined group of soldiers emerge from a combat zone. 23 soldiers, all alive, all accounted for, all brought to safety by a sergeant who had been ordered to stay with the vehicles and maintain communications. The official after-action report would describe the operation as a tactical withdrawal under enemy fire, but everyone who was there knew the truth. Maria Gonzalez had disobeyed direct orders, violated standard operating procedures, and risked court-martial charges to save the lives of her fellow soldiers. In the process, she had demonstrated the kind of leadership that emerges not from rank or authority, but from an uncompromising commitment to the principle that no one gets left behind. 6 months later, in a ceremony at the Pentagon, Maria received the Medal of Honor for her actions that day in the Afghan mountains. In her acceptance speech, she dedicated the award to the 23 soldiers who had trusted her enough to follow her through hell and back. "Heroes aren't born," she said, looking out at an audience that included many of the soldiers she had saved. "They're ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when the moment demands it. Today wasn't about one person saving others. It was about 24 people refusing to give up on each other." Lieutenant Colonel Richardson, who had initially threatened court-martial proceedings against Maria, later recommended her for promotion and described her actions as the finest example of battlefield leadership I have witnessed in 20 years of military service. But for Maria, the real reward came in letters from the families of soldiers she had saved, in wedding invitations from men who lived to get married because she had refused to abandon them, and in the knowledge that her promise to never leave anyone behind had been kept when it mattered most. The small-town girl from Texas had learned that true leadership isn't about following orders or maintaining protocol. Sometimes, It's about having the courage to break the rules when breaking the rules is the only way to do what's right. Years later, when military historians studied the operation, they would cite it as a textbook example of how individual initiative and moral courage can overcome tactical disadvantages and save lives in impossible situations. But the soldiers who were there that day knew it more simply. When everyone else had given up on them, Maria Gonzalez refused to give up on anyone.